everybody. How's it going? Why don't you come in a little bit closer? A little closer so I can see you better. A little closer. A little closer. Okay, good. I can see you real good now. Hey, welcome to week 5 of Corporate and Organizational Leadership. And you know what? Once in a while in our lives, we're fortunate enough to run into a leader whose sense of leadership and passion and vision comes from deep within them. Somebody whose life has been transformed by their own sense of destiny, of what it is they've been called to do. And last week we looked at charismatic leadership, and we talked about these leaders that are able to mesmerize people and sort of get them caught up in the big vision. But we talked about the downside a lot too, right? That charismatic leaders can sort of have this personalized power orientation. But this week we're going to talk about another approach to leadership, transformational and authentic leadership approaches. Both are very similar, but both have this sense that the leader is a genuine, real, authentic person, and what he's doing or she is doing comes from some place deep within them that is very important, and we feel compelled to get involved, right? To be part of the cause. And so today we're going to talk about these ideas, and it's really important, for us to think about these things. These are approaches to leadership that they're not just skills per se, right? They're not just, do these 5 things and you'll be a transformational leader. They really cause us to ponder our own lives and what's important to us, what our life story is, what brings meaning in our lives, and how we feel wired to really contribute to society and to our organization. So it might be a little more challenging for some of you. You might not be used to kind of thinking about leadership in those terms, but really these approaches to leadership have to do with the totality of who we are as human beings, not just our corporate face, not just the person we bring with us to work. But having said that, I think there's a lot that we can glean from these approaches that'll help us to connect with followers. And you know what? Each of us can become a transformational and authentic leader if we can tap into that place deep within us that is important, that resonates with those around us. So follow along with me and we'll take a look at these ideas. So the first thing we're going to take a look at this week is what's called transformational leadership. Now, transformational leadership has been around for about the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years, and it's probably still the most researched, popular, current conception of leadership out there. Still, there's a lot of writing about transformational leadership. It's not as popular as it was maybe 5-8 years ago, but it's still pretty dang popular. There's a very vast body of literature, and there's a lot of research support to back up some of the ideas of transformational leadership. So it's good. It's not just a popular approach. It is a solid academic approach. A lot of good theoretical backing and empirical support as well. So let's talk about it for a little bit today. Well, first of all, one of the best ways to understand transformational leadership is to look at the opposite, which is what's called transactional leadership. Now, as the name implies, transactional leadership has to do with a transaction, right? You do this and I'll give you that. And it's sort of the way that it's so common we don't even think about it much, but that's really the way most of the world works in terms of incentivizing and motivating from a leadership perspective. So for example, if you're a car salesman, right? Sell more cars and you'll get the bonus. If you're a student, turn in your assignments on time and do well on them, you'll get a grade. If you surpass your goals, you'll get a promotion. If you're a politician, vote for me and I promise no new taxes. Whatever the come on is, that's kind of the basic idea behind a transaction. And so it focuses on the exchange that occurs between the leaders and their followers. Now, transformational leadership is different. It doesn't focus on this transaction, this for that. It really is the process of engaging with others to create a connection that increases motivation and morality in both the leaders and followers. So it has a much deeper sense of connection, of we're in this together, and it has this sort of reciprocal idea too. It's not just about the leader transforming the follower, but there's sort of this, the followers also can influence the leader as well. And so the leader is attentive to the needs and motives of followers and tries to help followers reach their fullest potential. And this this was the original idea that came up with Byrne. James Byrne, back in 1978, he came up with this idea of transforming leadership. And so ever since then, leadership scholars have been thinking about transformational leadership. Gandhi was a good example of a transformational leader. He raised the hopes and demands of millions of his people, and in the process was changed himself. And so moving on, you should be following along with the slides here. Moving along the slides, you see this continuum then, right? Between transformational leadership on one end and transactional leadership. And then you also have something called laissez-faire leadership, which is really non-leadership. Laissez-faire is from the French, meaning to let be, and it has this idea, the idea that the leader really doesn't do a whole lot. Okay, and so it's really non-leadership in a lot of ways. Not surprisingly, it's been discovered to be the most least effective approach to leadership. So transformational leaders motivate their followers beyond the expected by raising consciousness about the value and importance of specific and idealized goals, transcending self-interest for the good of them and the team or organization, and addressing higher level needs. So it has to do with, being selfless, right? With putting others' needs ahead of their own, and addressing higher level needs. So it's usually not just about, making money, but it's about making the world a better place or making a superior product that's going to change the world, those kinds of things. Now, if you recall, last week we talked about charismatic leadership, and there is a sense in transformational leadership of this idea of charisma, this sort of, larger than life, specially endowed person, who's following their own vision, challenging the status quo. There is some of that, but that's not all there is to it. That's not sufficient. That's partially part of transformational leadership, but it's not all the whole deal. And so you'll see then there's a difference between transformational and charismatic leadership in that transformational leaders are about empowering other people, as where charismatic leaders are about having other people empower them or keeping power. Transformational leaders build others, charismatic leaders, others build them. So you sort of see there's sort of a difference in approach between those two things. And so there's a nice slide here that sort of shows all these factors. There's basically 7 factors in the whole transformational leadership model, 4 of them having to do with transformational leadership, 2 with transactional leadership, and 1 has to do with the laissez-faire model. And then you'll see this full range model of leadership, which goes from the ineffective transactional all the way to the transactional. So this is a good way to think about the whole transformational leadership idea as sort of leadership on a continuum from laissez-faire to transactional to transformational. So let's take a look at these 4 I's they've been called, the 4 I's of transformational leadership. The first is idealized influence, and this is where the leader acts as a strong role model, right? His or her own actions demonstrate what it is that he wants the follower to do. High standards of moral and ethical conduct, and making others want to follow the leader's vision. Okay, so this person has a lot of idealized influence. This would be similar to the charisma idea. Other people see him or her as a role model. Then the second I is the inspirational motivation, right? Communicating high expectations. Boy, that does so much for followers when you set the bar high. Sometimes we think, well, we want to be Mr. and Mrs. Nice Guy, and we'll just kind of make it easy for everybody. That's not what transformational leaders do. They set the bar high, and they expect others to reach up to those aspirations. They inspire followers to commitment and engagement and shared visions, and they use symbols and emotional appeals to focus group members to achieve more than self-interest. Okay, so some of these charismatic ideas, right? Symbolic behavior, emotional behavior, knowing how to tap into people's emotional aspirations. The next I is intellectual stimulation, stimulating followers to be creative and innovative, and challenging their own beliefs and valuing those of the leader and the organization. So this is the idea that, that leaders aren't afraid to take some risks, to challenge people, to go outside of the norm. If all you do is keep people in boxes and tell them what they can't do, guess what? You're not going to be a very transformational leader. Transformational leadership is about challenging people to do more, to take risks, to be creative, to try new solutions. Because when you do that, people sort of open up and they can do better things. They can try new things. There's an old saying, I think it was Albert Einstein, that the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, sometimes in organizations we sort of get stuck in those same boxes. We keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we're wondering why we're not getting any different results. Why are we stuck in a rut here, so to speak? Well, transformational leaders challenge and encourage other people to be creative and innovative. And then the fourth I is individualized consideration. Now, what does this mean? This means, listening carefully and attentive to the needs of the followers, acting as a coach and assisting and following, helping them through their personal challenges. So treating people like human beings. There's nothing worse than walking in, and sitting down and, you've got something heavy on your heart, and all of a sudden your boss just starts dumping all this stuff. I need you to do this, 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 and this. Well, how inspired are you to really work hard for that person? You're like, gosh, this guy didn't even take 2 seconds and notice that I was going through, a real crummy time now. And so transformational leaders take the time and think about individuals. And not only that, not only concerned for their feelings and well-being, but a bigger sense of being concerned about this person and their career path, what's important to them, where they want to go. Have you ever worked for somebody who only seemed concerned about their career? They could care less about you. Transformational leaders care about other people, and they think and they work with this person to help them achieve their own personal aspirations as well. It's a very big part of transformational leadership. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about transactional leadership, because again, to understand one side, you have to understand the other side. What is transactional leadership? Well, it involves two main things, and the first one is contingent reward. What is contingent reward? Well, it's sort of like what it sounds like. It talks about the exchange process between leaders and followers, in which effort by followers is exchanged for specific rewards. Okay, this is what most managers practice in their life. It's you do this and I'll give you that. You work hard, I'll give you both. You don't mess up and you won't get fired, right? That's another kind of a typical exchange, contingent reward behavior that a lot of leaders demonstrate. And then the other is management by exception. Okay, these are the kinds of leaders and managers, they don't do anything until something's broken, right? And there's some that they seem to have this nefarious, evil side to them, right? And they sort of can't wait for you to mess something up, and then boom, they pounce on you and you tell you that you did something wrong. It involves criticism and negative reinforcement, correction all the time. They're just always there to correct you and criticize you. That's sort of that management by exception. They're actively looking for you to make mistakes. And then there's the passive management by exception, right? This is the management that only intervenes after standards have not been met or problems have arisen. So these are kind of troubleshooters. They just kind of sit around and wait, and when something screws up, boom, they're all over it. This has also been called leave alone zap, right? These are the guys, they leave you alone. They don't say anything until you make a mistake, and then zap, they kind of, they're all over you, and they tell you, what you did wrong. So this is sort of that transactional approach, right? And you can see how this is worlds different from transformational, right? Encouraging people to be innovative, creative, consideration, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, there's the non-leadership factor, which is laissez-faire. It's the absence of leadership. It's really a hands-off, let things ride approach. Even if somebody screws up, well, it's their job, so I'm not going to say anything. Maybe somebody else will fire them. I mean, it's really not a very, very good approach to leadership. Refers to a leader who abdicates all responsibilities, delays decision, gives no feedback, and makes little effort to help followers satisfy their own needs. So, maybe you've had the misfortune to work for a laissez-faire leader, or maybe this describes you and you're thinking, really? I actually have to get involved? I actually have to talk to people? I got to be concerned? I got to give them feedback? Did I shave? Yeah, I think I shaved. Yeah, okay. All right, so where was I before I got off on this silly tirade here? So Burns and then later Bass in '85 came up with the 4 I's. There's been other people who've come up with models of transformational leadership. I just want to talk about some of those real quick. Bennis and Nanis came up with 4 leadership strategies in transforming organizations. Kouzes and Posner, great book, Leadership Challenge, came up with their model of 5 things, right? There are 5 fundamental practices: modeling the way, inspiring a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. So you see a lot of crossover, a lot of similarities between all these different approaches. All right, so what are some of the strengths to the transformational leadership model? Well, it's been broadly researched, as I said earlier. It's been widely researched, including a large body of qualitative research that's centering on prominent leaders and CEOs in major firms. It's got an intuitive appeal, right? Probably most of you, when you heard this, said, yeah, it sounds kind of good. I like it. That's an intuitive appeal. People are attracted to it because it makes sense to them. It's process-focused. Transformational leadership treats leadership as a process occurring between leaders and followers, and we said that early on. That's sort of our basic working assumption, right, for this class. It's an expansive view of leadership. It provides a broad view of leadership that augments other leader models. It emphasizes the follower, and it's effective. There's a lot of evidence, get this, folks, there's a lot of evidence that supports that transformational leadership is an effective form of leadership. So this isn't just some, nice pie in the sky, wow, wouldn't it be great if everybody was like this? People that act in a transformational leader model have better results. They're more effective. Their organizations are more effective. Okay, there is some criticisms that maybe perhaps it lacks conceptual clarity. Some of the measurements have been questioned. Sometimes it's been treated more as a personality trait or disposition. Remember we talked about kind of trait approaches early on. Some people sort of see this akin to that, that you either got the personality transformational leader or not, that it could be seen elitist and anti-democratic. It suffers from the heroic leadership bias, right? That it's all about the one person coming in on the white horse to save the day. And it's based on qualitative data and has the potential to be abused. Okay, so there are some criticisms. It's not perfect. You're not going to find a perfect model of leadership, but generally speaking, it's a pretty strong one. Lots of great applications. It provides a general way of thinking about leadership that stresses ideals, inspiration, innovations, and individuals, etc. It can be taught. You can teach some of these ideas. If you're doing leadership training, HR development, those kinds of things, you can teach a lot of these ideas. And you could break it down. If you want to talk about the individual consideration piece, you can talk about emotional intelligence and being attentive to other people and their feelings, things like that. So, anyhow, it's a great approach to leadership, and I hope you find this useful. Now, the next approach we're going to talk about to leadership this week is what's called authentic leadership. Now, authentic leadership sort of leaves off, where transformational leadership ends in a way, and it's a newer approach to leadership. It really started to become researched in about 2003 or 5, and there's a growing and emerging body of literature and interest in research on the whole idea of authentic leadership, and it really has some good things to contribute, I feel, to the whole field of leadership studies. Now, why are people interested in authentic leadership? Well, because there's a lot of change in society, social upheavals, and people, the way I look at it is, people want leaders that are authentic. They want leaders that are genuine, not phony baloney. I think we're tired of phony baloney, good time rock and roll, plastic banana leaders that really don't have any substance. They're just trying to sell us something. And the whole idea behind authentic leadership is that the leaders' ideals and passions come from deep within them. This is really part of their experience, part of their story, part of their reason for being on earth is to help move society along in this way. So, and again, kind of like transformational leadership, it's a bit more of a challenging approach. Not all of us can really tap into our deep story and experience and lead from this place. It's not that easy, and this is a tougher one to teach as well, right? It's more of a descriptive approach, I think, to leadership than a prescriptive one. But there are some ideas about it that are, learnable. And I think the biggest thing that we can learn from the authentic leadership approach is that it has to do with the totality of who we are and our lives, our lived experience, and so therefore it's kind of this growing, emerging process of becoming a great leader. It's not just, you go to a seminar, you learn it, and boom, now you're an authentic leader. No, it really has to do with the entirety of your life and your story and where you've come from and how you've developed to become the person that you are. And again, one of the things we know about leadership is it's not just a set of skills, but it really taps into you as an individual. And the more in touch you are with yourself, who you are, how you've been wired, how God has wired you to be, your gifts, your calling, your passion, all those kinds of things, to the extent that you become self-aware, is going to determine how effective and how authentic of a leader you can become. So let's look at some of these specifics. Okay, that's kind of the broad picture about authentic leadership, but let me kind of give you some specifics here. There's a couple of different ways of looking at it. There's the intrapersonal definition, and so leadership based on the self-concept and how the self-concept relates to actions, and it relies on the life story of the leader, and it followers need to affirm leaders' legitimacy. Okay, so it has to do again with the person of the leader, not the traits so much. How tall are they? How smart are they? But really, who is this person? How has their story defined them, so to speak? And so there's 4 authentic leadership characteristics in this regard. They exhibit genuine leadership. They lead from conviction, right? Authentic leaders are originals, not copies, and they base their actions on their values. So it's a value-based approach to leadership as well. Now, in addition to this intrapersonal, who you are as a person, there's also this developmental definition, which says that leadership can be nourished and develops over a lifetime, and it can be triggered by major life events. And I think this is one of the more interesting facets of authentic leadership, is that typically an authentic leader has had some sort of transforming event in their life that has changed them radically. And this is what has made them to become the leader that they are. And it's also grounded in positive psychological qualities and strong ethics. And so the 4 authentic leadership components are self-awareness, internalized moral perspective, balanced processing, and relational transparency. Okay, so, and then there's the interpersonal definition. All right, what does that have to do? It has to do with your relationship with other people. Leadership is created by leaders and followers together. Leaders need to obtain buy-in from followers. Again, it's not a transactional, you do this and you'll get that. It really has to do with selling the ideals to others. Intended outcomes achieved only when followers identify with the leader's values. So there has to be this value congruence between leader and follower. And leaders create change when they adapt their message to followers' values. So let's look at some of the practical approaches to authentic leadership and some of the ways that it has been conceived. Now, Bill George really was the first person that I'm aware of that began to talk about authentic leadership, really coined the term back in 2003. And he discussed a leadership characteristic model, that leaders have genuine desire to serve others, sort of like servant leadership, which we talked about earlier in this class. And that the 5 characteristics of an authentic leader are, 1, that they understand their purpose, that they have strong values, that they have trusting relationships, that they have self-discipline, and that they act from the heart or mission. And again, you can kind of see some of the overlap between this and the other transformational leadership. But again, the main distinctive is sort of this sense of self, understanding their purpose and acting from a sense of strong values. And so we see a figure in the overheads here on the leadership's character, sort of this circle with authentic leadership in the middle. Basic model of authentic leadership. Okay, so let's look at these 4 components here. The first one is self-awareness, reflecting on one's core values, identities, emotions, motive, being aware and trusting your own feelings. Now, again, because this is difficult for some people. A lot of people have a hard time tapping into self-awareness, and I think one of the biggest pitfalls that leaders face is not being self-aware. They sort of have this idealized image of themselves, and they say, this is who I am, and they've sort of crafted this wonderful person in their own mind that only they see. And so an authentic leader tries to cut through that and says, who am I? Warts and all. What are my passions and values and story and contribution? What are my limitations? What are my shortcomings? Those kinds of things. So authentic leaders really are in touch with who they are, strengths and weaknesses, those sorts of things. They have an internalized moral perspective, self-regulatory process using internal moral standards. And, we know from ethics, those of you that were in ethics class understand that, there's a different way that ethics develop. And there's sort of this conventional model, right, that we talk about where people adopt values because that's, what society tells us to do. This is this is what we should do, right? So we do things because we should do them. Sort of like a child, don't steal, don't take the cookie out of the cookie jar, right? You shouldn't do that. Mommy says you shouldn't do it. And so our sense of ethics and values is framed around the rightness and wrongness based on society. But then there's this other aspect that we do things because it's just the right thing to do, and we know that, and we've internalized that value. We ourselves believe in the value and rightness and wrongness of these certain principles, and that goes beyond just doing it because somebody's going to slap our hand if we do it, if we don't do it, right? And so they have this internalized moral perspective. Balanced processing, which refers to the ability to analyze information objectively and explore other people's opinions before making a decision. Have you ever met a leader, you mention something to them and then boom, just a snap decision, and you're like, well, wait a minute, you didn't consider all these things. And so this idea of being able to be comfortable with process, there's nothing worse than a leader that has no tolerance for process. Believe me, I've worked for these people before. Perhaps you have too. And so just being able, and it doesn't mean taking forever, analysis paralysis, taking forever, having to get everybody's opinion before you make a decision. But it's just a little more thoughtful approach to decision-making process that takes people's point of view into consideration. And of course, relational transparency, being open and honest and presenting one's true self to others. Okay, so again, it's not a phony, management, impression control, management control. What do you call it? Impression management. That's the term I was looking for. The charismatic leaders are real big on, right? The watch and the corner office and the car and all those kinds of things. It doesn't have to do with that. Factors that influence authentic leadership: positive psychological capacity, things like confidence, hope, optimism, resilience. These things make for very attractive features of a leader, people that are confident and hopeful and optimistic. And, are these traits? Well, at a certain extent they are, but on the other hand, I think we can learn these things. We have to learn to present the positive side of things. Nobody wants to follow somebody and all they ever have is the bad news, right? Eeyore. How'd you like to work for Eeyore? Oh, I think it's going to rain today, How you doing today, Eeyore? Well, not as good as yesterday. I mean, they've always got a problem. They always see the dark side, right? They always see the problems, potential problems. And that's more of a management trait, right? They're kind of, on the lookout. They've got their antenna put out for potential problems. That's what good managers do. But good leaders have to have this sense of confidence and optimism and hope. Let the managers, be the heavies, but the leader needs to project a sense of confidence and hope and optimism. The next factor is their moral reasoning capacities, deciding what is right and wrong, promoting justice, greater good of the organizational community. Now, what are some of the antecedent factors? And I sort of talked about this life story approach before, right? Well, what does that have to do with? Well, the critical life events, positive or negative. Some people have really, life-changing situations that really, propel them in a whole different direction. Think about the poor mother who lost her son in an accident caused by a drunk driver. Well, she was so impacted by that she made it her life cause to stop drunk driving, the incidents of drunk driving. And so she founded an organization called Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, or MAD. Maybe you've heard of them. And so her leadership, that's not what she intended to do with her life, I imagine. But because she was so impacted by that one single event, it transformed her. And now her life became about that cause. She felt the pain so strongly that she became committed to helping others not to have to go through what she had gone through. It's a wonderful, wonderful cause. It really serves, these antecedent factors serve to shape identity as one who seeks to answer the question, who am I? And again, all of us have an interesting story, and it comes from asking these questions about our family influence, about our childhood, culture, education, occupation, work experience. Who were some of the role models in our life? Maybe parents, siblings, teachers, coaches, early life challenges, previous leadership experience. So all of these things kind of go into the whole question of who am I? Trigger events, traditionally associated with negative events and crisis. I gave you an example there. Can also serve to stimulate positive growth and development. There's a lot of people who have overcome in life. And they've become role models and inspirations and leaders because they were able to overcome. I mean, there's some interesting stories about people who have had speaking disabilities, and it was such a hindrance, and they worked hard and they worked hard, and they finally overcame it, and they went on to become these very eloquent individuals. So some of these trigger events can include a promotion or a position with expanded responsibilities, voluntary decisions to change careers, pursuing a challenged advanced degree. So all these kinds of things can trigger, reading a book. Or how about this one? If you're a Christian, how about becoming a Christian in the first place, right? Not all of us, in fact, none of us, according to my theology, are born being Christians. That is a decision we have to make. And I think once we do that, when we make that decision to follow Christ, He really changes our whole trajectory in life. And we have a whole new disposition on what's important and our values and what we want to do. And so that's going to be a very strong trigger event. Let's talk about the congruence and divergence with the biblical worldview, since we're talking about being Christians here. Authentic leadership, I believe, is congruent with the biblical worldview. If you think about the many biblical leaders and who they are, they do what they do because of their life circumstances. And I know we're looking at some of these big leaders, biblical leaders, in our other reading in this class. And so if you look at a guy like Moses, right? Was Moses born being the deliverer and the savior of Israel? No, but he went through all these life experiences that groomed him to do that. And so when he finally emerged at the age of 80 and God asked him to lead his people, he was ready. He had the experience with Pharaoh and Pharaoh's court, learning all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He had the experience out in the desert with the sheep and, the unruly sheep. And, so God was really preparing him now to lead and to be the figure that God would use to lead his people and to take care of his people for 40 years in the desert and lead them into the promised land. Although he himself did not go into the promised land, he was the man who would bring them out of Egypt and prepare them. So this was all part of his life story, right? And so we see that the Moses, in a sense, was a very authentic leader. He wasn't doing this just because, looking through the paper, hey, what should I do? Baker, butcher, candlestick maker, savior of Israel. Yeah, I think I'll do that. No, it wasn't like that, right? It never is like that with these great leaders. It always comes from the identification with who they are and their real passion and experience. Christian leaders need to be genuine and authentic to those they lead. And they need to be relational and redemptive and authentic in their leadership. Okay, so again, I think this is a very congruent perspective with our faith. Another way I think this is congruent with our faith is this whole idea of calling, right? Some of you, I'm sure, have experienced a sense of calling in your life. And it may not be to ministry, but it's really this deep sense that you have inside that you have been called by God to do something. There's something for which you have a purpose in your life. And I think that really goes part and parcel with authentic leadership, is that we do what we do not just because, we decided out of many factors, well, this is what I want to do, but it really resonates with our deep sense of God's hand and will for our lives. That's part of this idea of being authentic, is being in touch with our calling. And whether it's to ministry or business or nonprofit or whatever it is, politics, we just have this sense that God has called us to do something. I personally, I believe that God has called me to be an educator. It's the way I'm wired. Everything in my past experience really pushes me to this field, and I love doing it. I don't know if you could tell, but I love teaching. I love working with students. I love ideas. I like communicating ideas. And so it's part of my calling in life is to be an educator in these many forms that I do it in. And perhaps you have that same sense too. I hope you do. And if you don't, I hope you can tap into that and ask yourself, what has God called me to do? What has God wired me to do? How am I unique? How has my life experience made me to be a unique individual with something to say, something to contribute, something to make the world a better place? So anyhow, let's talk about the strengths to the authentic leadership approach. Well, it fulfills society's expressed need for trustworthy leadership, right? We're kind of tired of phony, hypocritical leaders, and it fills a void in an uncertain world. Provides broad guidance for those who want to become authentic leaders. Both practical and theoretical approaches provide a map. And again, I said earlier that this isn't the easiest thing to teach, but it does give us some good ideas. It does give us some good, especially as individual leaders, some good ways to really think about leadership in our own lives and how we can become better leaders. Like transformational and servant leadership, authentic leadership has an explicit moral dimension. Unlike traits that only some people exhibit, everyone can learn to be more authentic and can be measured using an established instrument, the Authentic Leadership Questionnaire. And I believe that the Northhouse book has a copy, maybe a shrunk down copy of that. I encourage you all to take that if you want to learn more about that in your own sense of authenticity. There's some criticisms, of course. It's still in its formative stages, so some concepts are not fully developed or approached. The moral component is not fully explained. It's unclear how higher values such as justice inform authentic leadership. The rationale for including the positive psychological capacities such as optimism, hope, as part have not been clearly explained by the research, and the link between it and positive organizational outcomes is not clear. So there's not as much research on this, quite honestly. But every good theory has to start off somewhere, right? So it kind of comes up with the big picture, the ideals, and then we kind of move forward and we do some research to it. Some interesting applications, right? People can become authentic. HR departments may be able to foster authentic leadership behaviors in employees who move into leadership positions. Leaders are always trying to do the right thing, to be honest with themselves and others, to work for the common good. And leaders are shaped by critical life events that lead to grow into greater authenticity. So, if you've kind of gone through some stuff in your life, and you know what I'm talking about by stuff, but some tragedies, some problems, some hindrances, some disabilities, whatever it is, that can be the stuff of authentic leadership. That can be what fosters you to grow as an authentic leader. And you might be saying, wow, I never looked at it that way. I always thought that this was just a problem that would always prevent me from being a great leader. Well, authentic leadership says no. That can be the starting point for you to overcome, for you to succeed in spite of that, for you to help others with the similar kind of a hang-up, right? And so you take the lemons and you make some lemonade. And that's exactly what a good authentic leader does. They tap deep into their story. None of them have perfect stories. Excuse me. Usually they're hard stories. They're stories of bitterness and pain, rejection. But they overcome in spite of those things, and they use those things sort of as a lever, right, as leverage. They say a good karate guy, he knows how to take the opponent's blow and leverage it and come back at him. And so that's what authentic leaders do. So anyhow, I hope you find these two approaches, transformational and authentic leadership, interesting and helpful and useful to you as you consider how to become a more excellent and effective leader. So blessings to you. See you online.